Welcome to the LongCovidPodcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to be joined today by artist Alec Finlay, who has been integral to the COVID Memorial project taking part in Glasgow. So we're going to talk about the project and how you can get involved wherever you are. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Would you mind starting by introducing yourself and saying a wee bit about what you do?
So my name's Alec and I live in Edinburgh, and I'm a poet and artist, or artist and poet, depending what mood I'm in. I've made a lot of work about landscape and ecology, and also quite a lot of work about health, illness, well-being. I got ill with ME when I was 21, and one of the reasons I gradually became an artist and poet was it was the only way I could be economically productive in a way that worked with my limits as someone with a disability. And it took me an awful long time to even identify as disabled. I then got long COVID. I'm one of the people that come in the crazy week before lockdown. A lot of people with long COVID seem to have caught it around then. So coming up for year 3, and I saw the invitation to design Scotland's COVID Memorial, and it's the kind of project that always interests me. And there were some interesting questions around how one would do it. And I applied and was interviewed. I often collaborate, and I work with 2 friends, Lucy Richards and Ken Coburn. And we were commissioned based on the approach that we had, which we can talk about. And one of the things that made me happy and proud was that someone with long COVID would be doing the memorial itself. ME was like a 30-year preparation for long COVID. The diseases are very similar. They're like close cousins, if not brother and sister. So I knew what I was entering. But I've watched a lot of people with long COVID going through the same process of grief, anger, fear, anxiety, rage, worry, adaptation, hope, faith, remaking their lives. And so it's been very poignant for me to see that. And one of the things I hoped was that if people saw that someone who had been very seriously affected could still work on a commission like this, that it might be of some comfort.
Yeah, that's such an inspiring thing actually to do. I mean, like you've described it absolutely perfectly, all of those things that so many of us with long COVID have felt as we've gone through what's, well, almost 2 years for me, longer for some. Being able to look at someone who's really making something amazing is actually quite inspiring. So that's awesome. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I've learned a way of being creative, which is very shared, because I had to. It was appropriate to my energy. So I think that if I had approached this memorial as if I was making it, I would have gone mad with a mixture of expectation, pressure, and egotism. And one of the reliefs of the way I've approached it is that it really is made by hundreds of people.
Yeah, it's a real sort of collaborative effort, for want of a better word, isn't it? Yeah. So let's talk about the memorial project. So you saw it and thought, oh, where did it go from there?
The commission was very interesting because I won't go into too much detail because it's a bit geeky, but there had been an original idea for a cairn and then an idea for a memorial garden for the bereaved. And the various people involved in the memorial, I think, had realized that a garden would be difficult for the site that they'd been offered. And one of the reasons I think that they wanted to work with me is I offered them a way of working in Pollock Country Park in Glasgow, which is where the site is, that was appropriate to the site itself and that would make something that was very connected to nature, which they wanted, very healing, but wasn't like a formal memorial garden with flower borders and, a single work of art. I said to them that I wanted to work with what is really a wooded estate. So it's one of those old landed aristocracy estates that, are kind of, the landscape is formed in the 18th century. There are very old trees. It's laid out in the way of a traditional wooded landscape, and yet it's also accessible, from a train station. It's on the edge of Glasgow. And so I said that I wanted to work especially with trees. And as a poet who's an artist, or an artist who's a poet, I didn't go to art school. And a lot of the way I develop an idea is actually through language and images. I'm not a designer in the sense of an architect or a graphic designer. I love a thing an Austrian artist once said, that where he talks about designers being useful and artists being useless. And what I think he means by that is that artists don't lead by outcome. They tend to work slightly more intuitively. And one of the things we've learned as a culture is that the useless has a value. And so what I mean by that is, think of climate change. We now realize that, these vast peat moors in Scotland are part of actually preserving the planet. And I try and think of disability like that although it's difficult and challenging and we have limits, and if you like, we're useless, we still have a creative purpose. We still love, we still give. Look at what you're doing with your limited energy. I think disabled people are very good at adaptation. Anyway, to come to the point, I'd been thinking about the word support, and what people had been craving during the pandemic was support. To give support, to receive support. I now can walk 150 meters, so I can't reach the bus stop. So I depend on support. I depend on Morrison's bringing my groceries. I depend on friends. I also give a lot of support. And I actually know a lot of disabled people who do a lot of looking after. And that's a very interesting way of breaking a paradigm. So I had this image of support and how we hold one another up, how we hug one another, how we care for one another, how we support our bodies when we're tired. And I'd also been thinking about trees and particularly a Japanese tradition, which we have here as well, but it's more common there, of tree supports, basically crutches for trees. So when you want to preserve a branch that's vulnerable, that's bending low, a point where a tree can barely support itself, you can put in a crutch. And I thought that was a very meaningful image. And so rather than being a single work of art, the memorial is a series of supports for trees. But the supports are all based on what I call poses of support. So what I've done is I've invited people, and many of them bereaved families, some friends, some people that came along to events, to just simply make a pose of support with a tree, whether they're holding the tree up or the tree's holding them. So really it's about a relationship, using your arms, your legs, your body, and everyone does it differently. And I used those photos of those to draw very simple wooden posts and arms that look a bit like human bodies. So it couldn't be a simpler idea, and every one of them is different. And I look at them and I remember some of the people that were photographed. And every single support is with a particular tree, and that's very important. You feel this relationship between us and nature. We remember how many people found nature healing, especially in that first spring and summer. And every support has a phrase on it, I remember. Doesn't say any more than that. It leaves the memory free so people can bring their own memory. And most of them say it in English, but it also appears in Roma, Urdu, Japanese, Chinese, French, and other languages. And I felt that was important because it's about representing the reality of Scotland today. Polish, of course, is one of the languages. And most of the sports also have a little QR code. Many of us have got used to using them in cafes during the pandemic. And this links to an audio where I invited anyone who wanted to send me a memory. And it uses a very simple form that I didn't invent. It was invented by an American artist called Joe Brainard, called I Remember. And it's just a single sentence that begins, I remember. And so hundreds of people have sent in their memories. Some of them are of loved ones who died. Some of them are of their experiences of losing loved ones, of being in hospital, of having long COVID. Some of them are funny. Some of them are sad. Some of them are angry. Some of them are political. And I often use forms like that simply invite. Some of them are by me, but you'll never know which ones. Sometimes I hear someone say something and I write it down and it becomes a kind of, is it mine? Is it theirs? And we invited Robert Carlyle to read the audio. We're also making a book, and we're also making a web book, a website. And every single memory appears on the website, every one that I receive. When I get them, I paint them on a bit of A4 paper. And every single one is scanned. And we're giving the National Library of Scotland a digital record that will be preserved in perpetuity. And then we're burying the artworks that I paint at the site of the memorial in wooden boxes. And the book is a kind of halfway house selection, so it's longer than the audio, but not everything. It's a selection. And it's really the first oral history. Oral history is a funny word. It's the first communal history of the pandemic. 90% of the texts are not by writers. And that makes it very special, very authentic, very truthful. And I remember the day that I looked at the emails. A few would come in every day, and I got one that just said, I remember Andrea. And I hadn't thought of using it in that simple way. It was very moving. And this is what people who are not professional artists or poets or musicians do. They bring something refreshing. And there are many memories of people, sad, funny, bereft. And when Robert was reading them, he was in a studio in Vancouver and I was sitting here and he kept breaking down. And it was probably the most moving thing I've ever done in my life. He was so moved by the authenticity. And it wasn't a normal text for him. It wasn't by a movie script writer or wasn't a work of drama, but he just found it incredibly moving. And I had read them many times, but hearing them really brought it home to me. What an incredible document it is. And it just doesn't exist anywhere else. There are individual views, there are scientific views, there will be social histories, but this will be the largest collection of individual experiences. So the book will be out in May. The audio will be out on the National Day of Remembrance, 23rd of March. I never stop collecting I remembers, so people can keep sending them in. They won't now be in the audio. They're on the cusp of not being in the book. That'll go to the printer soon, but they will all be painted and they will all be scanned and they will all go to the National Library and they will all go on the website. So that's a very long description of the artwork. It's quite there's a lot of elements to it, but they all come together. So you can listen to the audio as you walk around the park. And in the park, the support artworks make a series of groves, just simple groups of trees, and then sometimes they appear along paths. Nearly all of them are accessible, and I wanted to create a kind of memorial walk. It's not a walk that goes from A to B. You can do it in any direction. You can do it more than once. Very few people will come and see all of the supports on their first day. Few of them are hidden away. Some of them are more like a formal grouping. And they're slightly larger than person-sized, but they're very simple. They're almost crude, and they're not portraits. They're all made of the single width of oak. So they're like a gatepost made into a person. And I say that because I didn't want to make portraits. I wanted them to be tree supports that were the memory of people, if that makes sense.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about Long COVID Breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you Long COVID Breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Yeah, it's such a beautiful idea. And like you say, you will have their own personal memories and they will have, you know, conversations they've had with friends and family, and they'll have heard other people's stories, but this sort of collection of everybody is just really, really lovely. And the fact that it's got so many different elements to it as well, so those who aren't able to travel to Glasgow, wherever they are in the whole world, they could still appreciate the project in other ways by the sort of the online book or the audio or in all these different ways. So it's really, really lovely.
I can say that it's really lovely as well because I didn't make it, in that sense that I think sometimes we can't speak of our own experience, but we can read someone else and go, yes, actually that's what I feel. Or we can read something and go, I had no idea how that felt. You know, I was on my own through the pandemic. Some people were in crowded family homes, overwhelmed by noise, and you get all of those different experiences. In terms of the supports in the park, it was in my mind that people also might choose the one that was special to them and make a pilgrimage to it. And that was another reason for not just having a single, you know, the usual single large thing.
Yes, because everybody will be able to relate more easily to certain experiences than others, of course. I mean, I've found it through interviewing people on the podcast and through reading people's stories on Twitter. And, you know, I'll read some and I'll think, that was totally different to mine. And then there'll be some that I'll read and I'll just think, oh my goodness, yeah, that was me. That's exactly how I feel. And I don't know, it's interesting to hear of other people's stories, but it also, I don't know, it's quite validating, isn't it, to see something and realise that it's very similar to yours, I think.
I feel that both are very important politically at this time, and I feel much more clear about the work I have to make now politically. There's a quote from a writer called Elaine Scarry that has always stayed with me since I read it and has really motivated my work over the last 4 years. She talks about how pain is a kind of great mystery in our lives, because when we have pain, it's the thing we most feel. But when pain is in someone else's body, we don't feel it. All we can do is believe in it. And we believe in it by knowing our own pain. And so when I read the different experiences, what I hope is that the experiences furthest away from mine will come towards me, and my experiences will go towards those people. In my lifetime, we've gone from when I was young, politics was about empathy across identity. So that as a man, I would seek to understand a woman's experience and vice versa. And that analogy of pain would be part of that. And I feel that we've moved increasingly towards a kind of competitive view of pain and a view where identities become very entrenched and like camps. And we go, well, the experience of violence belongs to me, or the experience of pain belongs to me and not to them. And it's been a great loss in our culture. Social media and conservatism in the widest sense have made it worse. And so when I make a work like this, it's about saying that every memory has validity. And that includes people who actually enjoyed the pandemic because it suited their sense of privacy, or people that write something humorous. And there is a wonderful thing in say, the Glasgow demotic attitude. You know, one day I got one that said, I remember Big Eileen, she was a pure tonic. That is wonderful as a memorial to someone. That cannot be beaten. That is so loving and funny, and it conveys the loss of that person. And I can't write that. No poet could write that. And it was such a beautiful thing to see. And so by choosing a form that didn't have barriers, so people sometimes make projects where they say, we're all going to write a poem. Writing a poem is quite difficult, you know, and sometimes it's a bit like getting kids to design hospitals. Like, you know, is that what kids want to do? So the I Remember form works. It's a space anyone can come into. And that's politically for me very significant. And I have felt that it was open to all of those experiences which are not mine. So I agree with what you say. But what I like is that there's something about reading a short memory where you don't feel your hackles coming up going, well, that wasn't what I went through, which is so common these days. A kind of exclusionary view of pain. And I won't go on about it. There was something very interesting happened with ME and long COVID that was similar, where early on a lot of people were pushing against it being identified with ME. And then gradually, a lot of people with long COVID found that their best allies were people with ME. And they realized just what it was like to be misbelieved, to have no adequate medical research, to have a deliberately prejudicial benefit system, to have no support to adapt one's life, to have no understanding what the experience of post-exertional malaise is. So what kind of disability is it where you could walk half a mile? Yes, but you would then be in bed for a week or longer. How do you explain that to a disability officer? All of those experiences I wanted to acknowledge, and I was aware from this experience of ME and long COVID that there's been both a dichotomy and a benefit. And I've tried very much to say that in my body, the illnesses are very similar and they are post-viral diseases. They are real. And if we had spent 30 years researching ME, we may have medicine for long COVID now. So we should learn to listen to people. We should learn to listen to everyone's experiences, not say that this pain only belongs to this group.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everybody's experience is equally valid.
And change happens by the relationship between experiences, if you like. It doesn't happen by excluding or prioritizing. Change often happens through, I'm going to come back to the useful and the useless. So I've tried to promote in my life a vision of creativity in relationship to limit. I never managed to enter the normal world of work. It was always a struggle to belong. But I've tried to do a lot of good with my art. And I know many other disabled people who don't focus just on their disability. They focus on it as an agent of change, an agent of empathy, and an agent of solidarity.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it's almost like coming back to that idea of making something beautiful out of something horrible.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really, I've certainly found that quite a helpful idea for me.
We had a lovely moment. We had an open day at Pollock Country Park in the autumn. And a few of the bereaved families came and they'd never actually met each other. And it was really moving to see how common their experiences were and that a lot of them had a lot of grief that wasn't resolved because of how their loved ones had died. And we're working with one particular woman where we just sat down, we let her chat away to the people she knew from the group. And we invited everyone to be photographed as a support. And she wasn't sure. She didn't really get art and she was a bit threatened by it. So we just took our time. Most of the photographs were made by a wonderful photographer called Hannah Laycock. She's very calm. People feel very safe with her. And after about half an hour, this woman felt ready to go off and walk among the trees with Hannah. And Hannah came back, and after the woman left, she told me that the woman had felt unable to actually make a pose of support with a tree, but she found a broken tree stump and she just stood by it. And she said, "That's me, I'm broken." And again, it was such a profound moment. And she'd broken the rule of the work, which was that you do this, but I'm making a single post by the actual stump that she stood by. So what you do when you extend empathy to people and their limit, even their inability to take part, is you find that they redefine what you're doing and they extend it. And so I hope that when she sees that and sees in effect herself, she will realize that her brokenness can be represented, that it wasn't that she couldn't, it was that she could in her way.
And I suppose that's sort of collaboration and working together and supporting each other, sort of true sense of it, isn't it? Contributing in a different way.
It's having an open enough process that people can do unexpected things. It was also for me about the fact, I didn't go off with her. I let her go with Hannah because Hannah was the right person. And it's about knowing your place. I'm sure you've had musical experiences like that. In creativity, people sometimes misunderstand that it's all about skill, and it isn't. Many people who do the best drawings, they're not necessarily skillful drawings. So for all of those reasons, it can be about devising an idea which has enough openness. And the idea came together right at the beginning very easily. But then the work was allowing it to become.
Yeah, it's almost like the idea was the seed of it, and then it just sort of grew and grew, isn't it?
Yeah, and every time we go to the park and try to arrange a support, we're having to work with the tree, its exact needs, how it's shaped. And so there's all of that you don't necessarily lead. You have modesty and respect, but you show people that you care. That's what they want to see, especially the bereaved families. And I suppose people with long COVID, they want to know that their experience is acknowledged.
Yeah, definitely.
So the work of making the memorial may be an emotional labor as much as a formal or aesthetic task. And this is part of it. Telling the story of the artwork is the artwork. It really is. It will go on. When I bury the I remembers, in one way they'll be lost, but that story will be part of the artwork and people will hear of it. Robert and I will talk about breaking down, and that becomes part of it. An artwork, a public work of art, to me, is not a material object. It's the stories we tell about it.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful.
We'll be right back.
Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. A way of putting it.
And that will include age, weather, vandalism, trees being broken in storms, change. So that's part of making a work of art outdoors in a park, that it will age and weather like we all do.
Yeah. Yes, and that's very natural because, like you say, that change happens to all of us, doesn't it? In whatever way. So you mentioned this burying of the I Remembers. This is one of the events that are coming up, isn't it? Are you able to talk a bit about them?
Yeah, that one's private. We're just inviting a couple of representatives from the long COVID group and bereaved families. And we will bury them on a little mound that's in the middle of the first of the groves. And they'll be safe there. And then on the 23rd, there'll be the first National Day of Remembrance. And it's not so much an opening or a formal event, but everyone is welcome to come. I'm actually not sure where we will be in the installation. We'll be right in the middle of it, or we'll just have begun, or we'll be nearly done. We're working in March mainly. And it doesn't really matter too much, but there'll be signs of the work happening. And it will be the first time that people have had a place to come. I know that there are probably also events in George Square and in other parts, other cities and villages and towns. So there's a minute's silence at noon. Anyone is invited to come. There's a car park just by Pollock House, or you can get the train and walk in if you're well enough. And the first of the sites, what we call the Riverside Grove, is just 150 meters walk from what is called the Riverside Car Park. So if you want to come in good time for 12 noon, and we'll be having the minute silence, and people will be free to say something. I will read some I remembers. And then the formal opening is in May, probably on the 27th, but we will confirm that. And at that event, I very much hope to have a open part of it that anyone can come to, which will be a memorial walk. But for those who can't walk, like myself, there'll be probably a picnic. There'll be just a time to hang out. And again, I will read some I remembers, and we will always have opportunities for other people to speak. People can always bring flowers to leave, not plastic, but flowers. There will be formal wreath laying, but also people can start to use the memorial in their own way. We also, it's not fully defined yet, but we have an aspect of the memorial where people can plant a wildflower. The staff in Pollock Country Park are actually collect seeds. So the flowers come from the park and they'll be planted in the park. And they don't just go by the supports, they go wherever people want, wherever they belong. And they will include all of the kinds of wildflowers that grow. We already did a planting of fritillary. So we'll arrange that if people want to remember someone, they can plant some wildflowers. We're not going to finish installing the memorial till March 2023. So there'll be a whole year just slowly making it. And I hope that every National Remembrance Day in March, we'll have a memorial event, a memorial walk, a memorial picnic, that gradually those will just become part of the pattern of people's lives. And they won't be, in a sense, about an artwork. They'll just be about living with the memory of the most shocking event of our lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, that people will have somewhere to go, but to go and do it in their own way and in their own time and their own space. That's nice because everybody has their own memories.
Absolutely. And there is a dream to make satellite memorials around Scotland following this, but it all depends on funding and it may not be possible. But we would like to do one support in a number of venues in villages, towns, community woodlands, art venues all around Scotland. So that's the dream, to actually give people a local memorial. But that all depends on fundraising.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, I mean, I will definitely put links in the show notes to where people can submit I Remembers if people are still wanting to do that, and information about the events and things as well, so people can follow that. So if anybody wants to get involved in whatever way they want to, they can absolutely follow that.
Let me say the rule again very quickly. It's a single sentence that begins I remember. And we allow any names to be mentioned, but first names only. And that's it. And you can send as many as you want. And we never stop collecting them. And you can give them the email. Yeah. So if they want to be in the book, do it in the next week or two. And they'll be considered. But if they just want to take their time, then they can always do it.
That's lovely.
I think I would just make a point, not as an artist, but as someone with long COVID and ME. I read, one of the main platforms for people with long COVID. And I'm just perpetually shocked and appalled at the repetition of my own life experience. When I got ME, I rapidly learned just to disengage from the NHS because unfortunately it didn't offer anything. And if anything, it could be upsetting. That situation of a lack of medical research and an almost deliberate distortion of what the illness was has been a phenomenon that dominated the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. But it's dwarfed by the experience of long COVID. And it is quite astonishing that I still see people who are desperate to go to long COVID centres and then go and return and say, well, really, there was almost nothing. Perhaps there was a heart test or a little bit of help with breathing. But the provision of medical research, of support, of adequate testing is just appalling. And to live that medical scandal twice, all I can do is say that this is what it was like. It was worse with ME because it was a smaller number of people. And there is less pretending that people with long COVID now are batty or have wrong thoughts. There's just too many of them. And sadly, there's too many medical professionals. And so we have undone that prejudice myth. But we should be angry and appalled and shocked. But we should also learn from the past that these things do happen, that people are simply left behind, that the NHS is absolutely wonderful with some illnesses, diseases, and conditions, but it really struggles to adapt to new conditions, to both post-viral illnesses, to autoimmune system illnesses. The tests are inadequate. There is no joined-up thinking. And we are largely on our own. And I do not know what good I can say about that, apart from to be really honest about it, that we have to make it change. And we have to hope for a change of government at a national level. We have to change the benefit system. And I know that you speak to other people far more expert in that. So all I want to do is reiterate it and to say to people that it's right to speak out. It's right to be appalled. And it's right that you all know that hundreds of thousands of people have already lived this for 30 years and that they were not helped. And so if we don't win help, it may not come.
Yeah, I completely agree. And having been ill for the best part of 2 years now, I can't even imagine what it must be like to have been suffering for longer. So let's keep fighting. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me today. It's been so lovely to hear about the project, and I think people with long COVID, as well as all the others affected by the pandemic, really appreciate that they're being heard and listened to and included.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for all the work you do with Limited Energy, and for all of the people that have helped to form the website and have offered people help and support. I think that it's such a crucial thing that we've seen all of these different support groups flower and flourish, and that we're all doing what the memorial does, which is we're offering one another support. So thank you for having my back, and I'll always do my best to have your back.
Thank you.
I hope that everyone takes care and keeps resting and has faith that they can adapt, and that out of this change that they have to go through, some good will come.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/LongCovidPod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.